July 14th, 2008. In the peaceful town of Pine Hill, a young life was brutally cut short. Amara Sinclair, a vibrant 16-year-old girl known for her infectious laughter and kind heart, was found murdered in a manner so gruesome it shook the foundations of the seemingly idyllic community. But behind this horrific act was a twisted tale of obsession, betrayal, and a love that turned into a deadly poison. Amara Sinclair, or Mara as her friends called her, was a bright, bubbly 16-year-old with a smile that could melt the iciest heart. She had just moved to Pine Hill with her parents, a transfer due to her father's job as a software engineer. Mara loved her cherry red Schwinn bicycle, vanilla milkshakes from the local diner, and the worn-out copy of Pride and Prejudice she carried everywhere. One fateful day, while riding her bike home from school, Mara saw a group of boys teasing another boy. The boy was smaller, with pale skin and the weathered face of an old man. It was Julian Bellwether, a 17-year-old suffering from progeria, a rare disease that caused him to age rapidly. The sight of the bullies tormenting Julian filled Mara with anger. She jumped off her bike, confronted the bullies, and they quickly scattered. But there was something about Julian, a quiet strength beneath his frail exterior, that drew Mara in. Soon, an unlikely friendship blossomed. Julian, used to being ostracized and ridiculed, found in Mara a beacon of warmth and kindness. They spent hours together, exploring the woods behind Julian's Victorian-style house, sharing stories and dreams under the shade of an old oak tree. Julian, a gifted artist, would sketch Mara as she read to him. Mara, in turn, introduced Julian to the world of pop music and taught him how to dance to the tunes on her iPod. Julian's mother, Eleanor, watched their friendship with a mix of apprehension and hope. A once renowned concert pianist, Eleanor had withdrawn from the world after being diagnosed with the same condition as her son. The sight of Julian laughing and connecting with another person filled her with a joy she hadn't felt in years. Yet a dark undercurrent lurked beneath the surface, and for a while it seemed like Julian and Mara had found the perfect balance. Their friendship was a haven for Julian, a place where he could shed the weight of his illness and simply be a teenager. Mara's presence filled a void in his life, and he clung to her like a lifeline. But as the days turned into months, a subtle shift occurred in Julian's heart. What began as innocent affection transformed into a consuming obsession. Julian's room became a shrine to Mara. He collected every little thing she touched: a stray hair tie, a candy wrapper, a faded Polaroid they took together at the town fair. His sketchbooks were filled with drawings of her, capturing her every expression, every movement. But soon it became clear that Julian's interest in Mara went beyond the bounds of normal teenage infatuation. He began following her, watching her from afar, memorizing her routine. He even snuck into her house while she was at school, inhaling her scent from her pillow, tracing her name on her notebook. Eleanor, always attuned to her son's emotions, noticed the change. She saw the darkness growing in Julian's eyes, the way his smile turned into a grimace when he spoke of Mara. Yet instead of steering him away from this dangerous path, Eleanor, fueled by her own isolation and resentment, encouraged it. She saw in Mara a threat, someone who could take her son away from her, and she would do anything to prevent that. Well, on the other side, Julian had decided he'll let Mara know the feelings he had for her, hoping she'll say yes to him. But it was truly his imagination. On Mara's 16th birthday, Julian, trembling with nerves and anticipation, decided to confess his feelings. He presented her with a carefully wrapped gift, a silver locket with a tiny, hand-drawn portrait of Mara inside. He told her that she was the most beautiful, kindest person he had ever met, that she was his everything. Mara, taken aback by the intensity of Julian's confession, gently but firmly told him that she valued their friendship dearly, but she did not feel the same way about him. She suggested they continue to be friends, hoping that Julian would understand. The rejection hit Julian like a physical blow. He felt a cold dread seep into his heart, a sense of loss so profound it was as if a part of him had died. He stumbled back to his home, the silver locket clutched tightly in his hand, a symbol of his shattered hopes and dreams. Meanwhile, Mara, unaware of the storm she had unwittingly unleashed, continued her life. She chalked up Julian's strange behavior to his illness, and the stress of his upcoming birthday. She even planned a surprise party for him at the local ice cream parlor, inviting all their friends. Little did she know this act of kindness would seal her fate. In the days that followed, Julian retreated into his shell, withdrawing from the world and immersing himself in his art and music. He refused to eat, barely slept, and spent hours staring out of his window, his eyes fixed on the house across the street where Mara lived. He became a ghost of his former self, a hollow shell consumed by despair. Eleanor, seeing her son's torment, felt a surge of rage and protectiveness. She couldn't bear to see Julian suffer, and she blamed Mara for his pain. A twisted idea began to take shape in her mind, a plan to mend Julian's broken heart and exact revenge on the girl who had dared to reject her son. The plan, as Eleanor saw it, was simple but sinister. She would use her maternal influence to manipulate Julian, to convince him that Mara's rejection was a misunderstanding, that she secretly reciprocated his feelings. Eleanor began to plant seeds of doubt in Julian's mind, suggesting that Mara was simply too shy to express her true feelings, that she needed a little encouragement. With Eleanor's encouragement, Julian penned a heartfelt apology letter to Mara, expressing his regret for his outburst and his hope that they could still be friends. He even invited her to a small gathering at their home, mentioning that Eleanor was eager to meet the girl her son spoke so highly of. Mara, still fond of Julian and unaware of the dark intentions lurking beneath the surface, accepted the invitation. She arrived at the Bellwether home, a charming Victorian house with a wraparound porch and a grand piano in the parlor. Eleanor greeted her warmly, offering her a glass of lemonade laced with a sedative. As Mara sipped the lemonade, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She excused herself to go to the bathroom, but her legs felt heavy, her vision blurred. Eleanor followed her, a predatory gleam in her eyes. She helped Mara to Julian's room, gently laying her on his bed. Julian, who had been waiting nervously in the living room, was summoned by his mother. He entered his room to find Mara asleep, her face pale and serene. Eleanor whispered in his ear, her voice a chilling mixture of love and malice. "She's yours now, my darling. Do with her as you please." Julian, fueled by a cocktail of emotions, heartbreak, desire, and a twisted sense of entitlement, succumbed to his darkest impulses. He raped Mara and abused her sexually in the worst way possible. Julian knew he did wrong to her, but his obsession, dark fantasies, was too hard for him to control. What was born within there was not that sweet boy who, despite everything, still held on to his compassion and empathy. He was now pure evil. When Mara stirred, awoken by the pain, she screamed, her eyes filled with terror. Despite everything, Julian's craziness was undeniable. Ignoring her cries, he asked her if she loved him. Now, of course, if someone had been through such abuse, they would clearly show off the hate toward the next person, and Mara did the same. She clearly shouted at him, saying she hated him. At that moment, something snapped in Julian. The last vestiges of his humanity vanished, replaced by a rage that consumed him entirely. He grabbed a pair of scissors from his desk and plunged them into Mara's chest again and again, until her screams were silenced forever. The horror of what he had done washed over Julian, but it was too late. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Eleanor, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room. She saw the bloody scene, the lifeless body of Mara sprawled on the bed, and Julian, shaking and covered in blood. But instead of recoiling in horror, Eleanor embraced her son. She whispered words of comfort, telling him that he had done what was necessary, that Mara had deserved her fate. Together, mother and son carried Mara's body to the backyard incinerator, a grim furnace where they would destroy all evidence of their crime. The following morning, the quaint tranquility of Pine Hill was shattered by the news of Mara's disappearance. Her parents, having waited up all night for her return, reported her missing to the local police department. A search party was quickly assembled, combing through the woods, the parks, and the quiet streets of the town. But there was no sign of Mara. Detective Silas Warren, a seasoned investigator, known for his sharp mind and dogged determination, was assigned to the case. He had grown up in Pine Hill, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and the disappearance of a young girl struck him deeply. But Warren was not prepared for the darkness he was about to uncover. As Warren began his investigation, he questioned Mara's friends and classmates, hoping to find a lead. They all described Mara as a friendly and outgoing girl with no known enemies or troubles at home. Warren's suspicions were piqued when he learned about Mara's friendship with Julian Bellwether. The Bellwethers were a reclusive family, rarely seen outside their home, and Julian's unusual appearance and condition made him an easy target for gossip and speculation. Warren visited the Bellwether residence, a foreboding house with peeling paint and overgrown ivy. Eleanor Bellwether answered the door, her face a mask of grief and worry. She told Warren that Mara had visited them the previous evening for a small gathering, but had left early, saying she wasn't feeling well. Julian, she claimed, was too distraught to speak about Mara's disappearance. Warren, however, was not convinced. Something about Eleanor's story didn't sit right with him. Her grief seemed forced, her eyes shifty and evasive. He returned to the police station, a gnawing suspicion growing in his gut. Meanwhile, back at the Bellwether home, Eleanor and Julian were scrambling to cover their tracks. They meticulously cleaned the house, removing any trace of Mara's presence. The silver locket Julian had given Mara was tossed into the incinerator, melting into a shapeless blob of metal. The bloody scissors were buried deep in the woods behind the house, hidden beneath a moss-covered rock. But they had made a mistake. In their haste, they had overlooked a small detail, a tiny drop of Mara's blood on the edge of Julian's bed. This microscopic clue would prove to be their undoing. A few days later, the police received a tip from a neighbor who had seen smoke billowing from the Bellwether's chimney late at night. A search warrant was obtained, and the police returned to the house, this time with forensic experts. The evidence they found was damning. The incinerator contained charred fragments of human bone, and the woods behind the house yielded the bloody scissors. The tiny drop of blood on Julian's bed matched Mara's DNA. Eleanor, realizing the game was up, confessed to the murder. She claimed she had acted alone, that Julian had been asleep the whole time. She painted a picture of a jealous and unstable woman, driven to madness by her son's rejection. Warren, though skeptical of Eleanor's story, had no choice but to arrest her. She was charged with murder and imprisoned, leaving Julian alone in the empty house, haunted by the ghost of the girl he had loved and the monster he had become. With Eleanor behind bars, a semblance of peace returned to Pine Hill. The community mourned the loss of Mara, holding candlelight vigils and leaving flowers at her makeshift memorial in the town square. But the scars of the tragedy ran deep, leaving a lingering sense of unease and mistrust. Unbeknownst to anyone, Julian Bellwether was far from being consumed by remorse. Instead, Eleanor's sacrifice had twisted his perception of reality. He saw himself as a victim, wronged by Mara's rejection and the world's cruelty. In his warped mind, he had been justified in taking Mara's life, and the world owed him a debt for his suffering. Julian retreated further into isolation, spending his days and nights in his room, surrounded by Mara's belongings and his macabre artwork. He began to fixate on other girls in town, girls who reminded him of Mara, girls with long, flowing hair, bright smiles, and an innocent charm. He watched them from afar, his heart filled with a toxic mix of longing and hatred. A dark seed had been planted in Julian's soul, a seed that would soon grow into a monstrous obsession. Years passed and Pine Hill slowly began to heal. New families moved in, children grew up, and the memory of Mara's murder faded into the background. But on the anniversary of Mara's death, a chilling pattern emerged. Young women all around Mara's age, and with similar features, started to disappear, only to be found days later, their bodies brutally mutilated. The town was gripped by fear and panic. Detective Warren, now retired but still haunted by Mara's case, was called back to consult with the new lead investigator. As they examined the crime scenes, a chilling detail emerged. Each victim had been killed on or around her birthday, and a single white rose was left beside each body. The similarities to Mara's murder were undeniable, and Warren knew that they were dealing with a serial killer. The hunt for the killer intensified, but the police were baffled. There were no witnesses, no leads, no apparent motive. The only clue was the white rose, a symbol of love and purity turned into a sinister calling card. One night, as Warren was poring over old case files in his home office, he stumbled upon a piece of evidence that had been overlooked in Mara's case, a sheet of music found in Julian's room. It was a haunting melody, filled with sadness and rage. Warren recognized it as a piece Eleanor Bellwether used to play on her grand piano. A chilling realization dawned on Warren. Could Julian be the killer? He knew that Julian had been deeply affected by Mara's death and his mother's imprisonment. Could those events have triggered a psychotic break, transforming him into a vengeful monster? Warren's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and determination. He knew he had to find Julian, to uncover the truth behind the White Rose murders, and to stop the cycle of violence before another innocent life was lost. Warren's first step was to locate Julian Bellwether. After all these years, Julian had vanished without a trace. His house stood empty, a silent monument to the tragedy that had occurred within its walls. Neighbors reported that he had left town shortly after his mother's arrest, selling the house and disappearing into the night. But Warren, with his years of experience and unwavering determination, refused to give up. He dug deeper into Julian's past, scouring through school records, library logs, and any other scraps of information he could find. It was a daunting task, like searching for a needle in a haystack, but Warren was relentless. One day, a breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. A local librarian, Mrs. Henderson, contacted the police, claiming she had seen a strange figure lurking around the library's music section. The figure, she said, was an elderly woman with a hunchback and a white rose pinned to her coat. The description sent a shiver down Warren's spine. Could this be Julian, disguised in a masterful deception? Warren immediately set up surveillance around the library, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious woman. Days turned into nights, but there was no sign of her. Just as Warren was about to give up hope, fate intervened. One evening, as the library was closing, Warren spotted a figure slipping out the back door. It was the elderly woman, clutching a worn-out music book. Warren followed her at a distance, his heart pounding with anticipation. The woman led him to an abandoned theater on the outskirts of town. Warren cautiously approached the building, his hand hovering over his gun. As he peered through a broken window, he saw the woman sitting at a grand piano, her fingers dancing over the keys, playing the same haunting melody that had been found in Julian's room. But as Warren watched, something strange happened. The woman's movements became jerky and unnatural, her fingers fumbling over the keys. She stood up, her back straightening, and began to peel off a rubber mask, revealing the pale, aged face of Julian Bellwether. Warren burst through the door, gun drawn. Julian, startled, turned to face him, his eyes filled with a chilling mix of fear and defiance. The theater was Julian's lair, a macabre sanctuary filled with macabre mementos of his victims. Photographs, locks of hair, and white roses preserved in glass cases. In the ensuing confrontation, Julian confessed to the murders, his voice a chilling whisper. He spoke of his hatred for women, his twisted desire for revenge, and his belief that he was doing the world a favor by ridding it of those who reminded him of Mara. But even as he confessed, Julian showed no remorse. He spoke of his victims as if they were mere objects, playthings to be used and discarded at his whim. The sheer evil that emanated from him sent a shiver down Warren's spine. The confrontation ended in a dramatic showdown, with Julian attempting to take his own life before being apprehended by Warren. He was taken into custody, his reign of terror finally over. The people of Pine Hill could finally breathe a sigh of relief, but the scars of Julian's crimes would forever remain etched in their hearts.